So it's my pleasure to introduce Tadashi Fukami, or Tad Fukami, who's giving us the lecture today. I once heard someone describe Chappell Rowan, this new singer, as like your favorite singer's favorite singer. Tad is like your favorite ecologist's favorite ecologist. He's a really brilliant scientist. He's had a lot of really wonderful contributions throughout his time to basic ecology. He's worked a lot in an area called historical contingency, and this is just the idea that when you look at a community, the end state actually depends a lot on the process of how you got there, so the order in which species arrive. So he's made really fundamental contributions there. In the last couple of years, we're really lucky that Tad has turned part of his attention towards thinking about traditional ecological knowledge. For now, was it 3 years you've been running the TEK reading group? Yeah, he's been running a TEK reading group for students and graduate students. He's the director of Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve. He's been doing work to try and incorporate Indigenous voices into the management of Jasper Ridge. And he's been working with people in Japan, some local groups in Japan as well, to incorporate some of his ecological studies with the traditional ecological knowledge that those people have. So I won't talk anymore because I'm boring, but Tad's going to give you guys a great lecture. So please join me in welcoming Tad Fukami.
Okay, is microphone working okay? In the back, people in the back? Okay, well, thank you for having me here. So today I wanted to talk to you about traditional ecological knowledge. And so before that, I think it's good to tell you who I am, because I'm not actually expert on, hopefully this is not a disappointment to you, but I will never claim that I'm an expert on traditional ecological knowledge. And I think you'll see that in this lecture today. But I thought that to introduce myself, so I'm born and raised in Japan, and I'm not native to California. And I'm conventionally trained in a Western way of science, conventionally trained ecologist. But recently, as Kabir was saying, I got really interested in traditional ecological knowledge, and you learn what it is really about. But there's this concept called reciprocal restoration, meaning that if you are thinking of restoring ecosystem, if ecosystem damaged, you are trying to restore those ecosystems. But this idea of reciprocal restoration that's advocated by this indigenous scholar, Robin Kimmerer, means that as you try to restore ecosystem, you're also being restored by land. And if you're being restored in terms of how you work with the land, then that restoration that you have yourself is going to help the land restoration. It's a reciprocal relationship. So that's one of the key ideas that we have from the traditional ecological knowledge. And I'm trying to learn more about that and trying to help promote that. But about 20 years ago, I was a researcher working in New Zealand, Aotearoa. And that's the first time I got introduced to this idea of how indigenous culture and wisdom is important in thinking about ecology. But then after that, when I was doing teaching with people like you, undergraduate students, I always get a lot of inspiration from undergraduate students. It's this the excellent place to be a teacher, because you learn from students. And then as I was thinking about ecology, I was mostly interested in basic science, but I was introduced to the idea of the climate change and climate crisis from the students maybe several years ago. And gradually, I came to this realization that the key is indigenous science. And so that's how I get to this traditional ecological knowledge. And today, I'm being just a humble student, just among you, and I'm just trying to share information that I think is important and then thoughts about it. And so that's the positionality that I have. And so today I wanted to talk about first, what's TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, and second, how does that different from the Western way of thinking about ecology, approaching ecology? And often sometimes it's called SEK, scientific ecological knowledge. And then after that, I wanted to talk about why TEK matters, why TEK is important. And then lastly, we wanted to look at a little bit about what's happening locally here. You came from different places, different places in the US, and also I think some of you are international students. And so you come here to this Ohlone land, this San Francisco Bay Area, but wherever you live, even temporarily, I think that it's very important to learn more learn about something about the local indigenous groups and then culture, because that really matters to you, regardless of whether you're indigenous or not to the land that you live in. And so let's start with TEK. By the way, please feel free to ask me questions. You can raise hand and I will try to answer your questions as we go. TEK has been defined in many ways, and I'm just putting up this. So I know that Kabir talked a lot about national parks the last time. And so this is one of the, I think is a common definition that's been given to TEK, but there are different definitions, and it's kind of in flux what we should define TEK as. But I'm going to just read out here because I think there are a lot of key things here. It's the ongoing accumulation of knowledge, practice, and belief about relationship between living beings in a specific ecosystem that's acquired by indigenous people over hundreds or thousands of years through direct contact with the environment handed down through generations and used for life-sustaining ways. And so there's some key words here, like knowledge, practice, and belief, and then it's specific ecosystems, indigenous people, and a long time, and in direct contact. So those are some of the key things, and we'll go into this a little bit more as we think about the specifics of this concept. And so Sigrid Berkes has this textbook called Sacred Ecology, and this is the latest one, the fourth edition, I think published in 2018. He himself, he's Canadian. Himself is not indigenous to any place in Canada. I think he's one of the people who immigrated to Canada, like most people like here and in Canada. But he is one of the leaders of this field, TEK. And in this textbook, he kind of unpacked this TEK. Even though he's one of the people who advocated for this term expression, he says that TEK is a problematic term for many reasons. One, so each of these words are difficult because we say traditional to indicate that it's something that developed for a long time, like thousands of years. But when you say traditional, it's not really accurate because traditional sounds like it's things of the past. That's far from truth. It's a involving contemporary thing that's very relevant today. But we say it is traditional. And for ecological, that's a TEKE now. Ecological, that's not really accurate because when you think about indigenous way of thinking about nature, it's different from Western science because in Western science, we try to be siloed because you have to specialize. You want to be expert. So we have ecology as a field, physics as a field, chemistry as a field, history as a humanities field. But that's not really what TEK is really about. It's not really ecological, it's everything. So, but we say ecological because that's what we want to focus on. And then knowledge, you already saw in the definition that I gave you from National Park Service, that it says knowledge, practice, and belief. And so knowledge is also not accurate because it's not just what you know, but how you live, and then all of the things that are important to the living. And so knowledge is not really accurate, but we use it because that's how we approach TEK from the Western scientific perspective. So you can already see the struggle. We're trying to translate something very culturally different so that we can think about it in a scientific way. And so this struggle itself is kind of telling that we are dealing with something very fundamentally different from how scientists, conventionally defined, how scientists think about ecology. And then maybe the alternative term might be IK, indigenous knowledge, to emphasize that there's indigenous aspect to it, but that's also not really accurate. And knowledge is not very good either. It doesn't capture the things that we're trying to understand. But indigenous is also not completely satisfactory because maybe this is my opinion, but it doesn't have to, TEK doesn't have to be necessarily indigenous. For example, there's maybe a place where people have lived very long time. And so it might not be indigenous, but maybe those people who live today might not be actually the first people who got there. But if they lived in a similar way to many of the indigenous groups have, then the knowledge accumulated for a long time, hundreds and thousands of years, that could be also very similar or even the same as what we consider TEKs. And then as a counterpart, we say often Western science, but it's not really Western because there's a lot of Western, what we think of Western science from, a lot of this coming from China, for example, or anywhere in the world. And so Western is also a little bit misleading. And then SEK, scientific ecological knowledge. When we say science, that's also what usually when we think about science, that we're thinking about conventional science. But how you define science itself can be up to the debate, because we see indigenous science is something different from Western science. Since all of these terms, just this struggle that we have to try to express what we are trying to understand itself is an indication that we are having this fundamentally different thing. But despite that, there's a lot of momentum that's being gained. There's an increasing number of people, particularly ecologists, but also just anywhere, anthropologists, archaeologists. Maybe those people have been thinking about TEK for a long time. But there's a lot of people, more and more people, the traditionally trained ecologists, like I'm just one of the many people who have become very interested in understanding TEK and the importance of that. So for example, Ecological Society of America, ESA, started this, they have different chapters, theoretical ecology or plant ecology. So they have subdivisions, and they started TEK chapter or division more than 20 years ago now. And this CBIX, this is a Center for Braiding Indigenous Knowledge and Science. It's a NSF, National Science Foundation funded center. So US National Science Foundation sometimes gave a lot of funding so that we can make some national scale effort to think about one particular field. And they decided that the indigenous science, or TEK, is a good thing to spend a lot of invest so that we can move forward with this TEK. And so that is another indication that there's a momentum going on. And then to me, there are a lot of great indigenous scholars who are making an effort to tell us, to explain to us in a way that we can understand what is TEK really all about and why it matters. And so, for example, Robin Kimmerer is one of those leading indigenous scholars. And then many of you might have already heard of it or even read this book called Braiding Sweetgrass. And she's the one, as I mentioned, who thought about reciprocal restoration. But if you haven't read this book, I think that this is one of the most important books in history. So we have Original Species. We think of that as the most important books in biology. And we have Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, who led to this idea of environmental protection. And I think this book is going to be just as important as Silent Spring or even Original Species, in a way that she's explaining why the TEK matters to us in this age of climate crisis. So I really highly recommend. And you see that here, Robin Kimmerer is a conventionally trained ecologist. She went to University of Wisconsin, where they have the strongest, the best botany program in the world. And so she's trained there as a botanist. But she's also a citizen of Potawatomi Nation, upstate New York. She's also an indigenous. That's part of her also important element of her identity. So what she was able to do in this book is to talk about plants and an ecosystem from both sides, as a conventional scientist and also indigenous person. It's just beautiful what she does here. So you will see why the TEK is important if you read this book. When I was excited to learn that she's actually have this book coming also in November. And I don't know what this book is about because it's still not available, but it's forthcoming soon. And then there are also other people, like Dennis Martinez is somebody who advocated this idea, proposed this idea of kin-centric ecology, meaning that all of the organisms, like plants, animals, microbes, whatever organism we have that live together with us, humans. Human is one of just the many species in the ecosystem. And we should think of all organisms as our kin, as relatives. And so if you think about relatives, you treat them in a kind way, in a nice way, like you do with your brothers and sisters. And so this kin-centric ecology is another kind of related idea to reciprocal restoration. I just wanted to just identify just another scholar because there are many more other than Robin Kimmerer, who is making an effort in making TEK more widely recognized. And then we don't hear so much from other countries like Canada and New Zealand, Aotearoa, because sometimes they don't use TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, as key term. For example, in New Zealand, if you go to New Zealand, they use Maori words in scientific papers. And so we miss these papers, but there are some other countries compared to US, they are far ahead of us in thinking about TEK, Maori Mataranga, Mataranga Maori, Maori knowledge, or Te Reo Maori, that's Maori worldview. Those are the words that are Maori words that they use. So they're kind of ahead of us because they don't say TEK, that's an English translation. They use their indigenous word to refer to TEK. Okay, then I wanted to then go on to a little bit more so that we can understand TEK a little bit more. I think it's helpful to directly contrast TEK with SEK, scientific ecological knowledge. So that's what I wanted to do here. Just to list in things that I learned from reading Kimmerer's book or other papers, and also other scholars' books and papers. This is my understanding, and hopefully if you see something different or wrong in this table, please raise your hand. And I'm once again, I'm being a student just among you to learn about this. You would have to be, I had one of my New Zealand colleagues who is an indigenous scholar. She visited here. She said that you would have to grow up indigenous to be really authentically indigenous. And I think I think there are different views, and it might not be completely agreeable by everyone, but there's some truth to it. So I'm Japanese talking to you about TEK in the US. And so I'm kind of a non-native speaker being here. I'm a non-native speaker of English, but also non-native speaker of TEK. And so you should recognize that I'm not really being a teacher here. But having said that, one contrast is that I already mentioned that some TEK is something that has developed for a long time. And so it's what characterizes TEK is that it's a community shared knowledge and wisdom, and it passed down from generation to generation and over many generations. So there are failure and there's successes that they do when they live in the environment. And then based on that, there's wisdom that's being developed, and that happened over a long time. And so it's an intergenerational knowledge, body of knowledge. On the other hand, Western way of doing science, there's a lot of emphasis on individual researchers. So you have a papers, and it's very important that there are author names. And then authors, it's important that we always just constantly every day we're thinking about who should be authors and who should be co-authors and who should be recognized as lead authors, because there's a lot of emphasis on individual researchers and then individual researchers providing knowledge. And so that's in contrast to this community-based knowledge base. And then another thing that's key is whether it's participants or observers. When I say participant, it means that participants of the ecosystem or landscape. And so the view that the indigenous TEK has is that you are the knowledge holder is part of the ecosystem that you want to they want to understand. And so you are living and you are interacting with plants, animals, and then the land and water. And so the knowledge that you have is about how to live in that ecosystem. On the other hand, in SEK, there's a lot of emphasis on observing nature. So to be objective and to have a good understanding, it's important that you distance yourself from the ecosystem, because in that way, you have an objective, neutral way of understanding nature. You do the hypothesis testing, and you do experiments, you make observations. If you are in the ecosystem, as part of the ecosystem, then you're biased, because that's you. And so that's not the way to have good objective understanding. And so that's different of participants of observers. Another thing is it's a holistic. I already said that it's not just ecology, it's not just knowledge, it's everything about how to live. That defines TEK, and it's not just about knowledge, it's the practice and beliefs. And so it's everything. And it's not just ecology, physics, chemistry, music, and the literature and so on. So it's very holistic, and the TEK is strong because it's holistic. But that's not how Western science is very poor at doing that. It's analytical. You want to have ecology or community ecology or plant ecology or Kabir is a mycologist, fungal ecologist. And so you want to specialize because that's how you go deep into the knowledge. But as soon as you have ecosystem, that's a very challenging thing for ecologists, conventional ecologists to understand, precisely because the way to do hypothesis testing is very analytical. And then you just simplify things, and then you have this mathematical model, for example, and then try to, by simplifying, you get to the good understanding. That's the approach that scientific ecological knowledge has. And then another thing is local versus global. The TEK is very local. It's about place-based knowledge. And so it's this kind of a repeating the same thing that's about participant. It's this kind of a same thing that that I already talked about. It's about, you see in a National Park Service definition, it's a specific ecosystem. It's about this localness, local place that you are living in. It's the local landscape, local land that you want to understand. And it doesn't, so sometimes maybe something that you've heard about something else that's happening in other places, that can be helpful. But the purpose is really think about, understand how to interact with other members of the ecosystems. On the other hand, in science, there's a lot of value placed on general principles. If you're a scientist, your ultimate goal is to come up with and discover this general theory of everything. And so in ecology, if you want to understand community, for example, I'm a community ecologist. I think about how the ecological communities are assembled and then function. And then we want to discover this something that's the general rules that are governing the aquatic ecosystems or terrestrial ecosystems, something that is very common across all of the things that are happening in nature. And we think that's a really valuable thing. And I still think so, but it's a very different thing compared to the local focus that TEK has. And then lastly, it's the TEK. It's not that the individual researchers doing hypothesis testing. It's the time tested. So you try things and then you learn from something that didn't work well at all, and the things that you do with the fish or the animals that you hunt, and then there are things, and then over time you learn from trial and error as a community, and that's different from hypothesis testing. And so those are the things that I think are in contrast between these two ways of approaching understanding of natural world. And then this is also kind of my opinion. I think there's this concept called animism, and it's kind of misleading because animism is used as in a negative, both negative and positive way. But I read some authors saying that TEK is something maybe similar to or part of that is animism, meaning that you don't think of humans as exceptional. You just humans, people are just one this tiny part of the ecosystems, and then there are other organisms are also just as important or just as spiritual as humans. And so animism is maybe one word that you can use to describe TEK. And on the other hand, dualism is maybe one name that you could put to conventional science, meaning that it's kind of about the observers. So you have one thing that you want subject, and you have yourself, and you're free. You are a free thinker, and you're trying to understand ecosystem. That's kind of a dualism. You are distancing. There's two things that are really separate. I think I have a few more things that I wanted to say about this contrast between TEK and CK. So Kimmerer says that TEK exists around the world, not just to Native Americans or any part of the world, but it's independent of ethnicity. And when you think about it, if you hear people indigenous to Japan, for example, indigenous to to Africa or indigenous to South America, anywhere. It's very striking. Not that I know everything about the world, of course, but this is consistent with what I know about what I experienced and heard in New Zealand. And I also spent a few years in Hawaii as well. And I learned a little bit about Hawaiian culture there. And I know a little bit about the Ainu, the indigenous people in Japan. And now I'm learning the indigenous people in California. And then Kimmerer and Dan Schilling is another indigenous scholar. So they know much more, of course, about what's going on around the world, because that's what they study. And then they came to this conclusion that there are common threads, despite this localness, the place-based emphasis of each TEK at each places. If you look at and then see, it's like a scientist thinking about general principles. It just so happened that wherever you go, even though there are important details that are so different, because it's specific to each climate and in each place, there is this common theme like gratitude and respect. You have the TK is characterized by this being thankful to nature and in what nature can provide, and respect other organisms. And there's also reciprocity that you do something to the ecosystem, to other organisms, and they give back. And then there's this reciprocal relationship that's seen in most it seems like in most places or all places where TK is practiced. And responsibility, if you are people living in that area, there is also responsibility to do good things to the ecosystem. And it's, once again, it's kin-centric. And every organism is a relative. It's not just people, or it's not just your group, your family. All living things are relatives. And all of these seem common. And so I think that in biology, so now I'm being just momentarily, I'm being just a squarely conventional biologist. If you're a biologist, and if you think about evolution, when you see some traits of organisms evolving in different places independently, and they have the same thing because they are evolved as a result of same environmental selective pressures, some traits, then we call it convergent evolution. It's not really evolution that we are talking in a strict sense. We are thinking here, but if you see as a biologist, convergent evolution, independent evolution, getting to the same answer, you think that there's something very deterministic, something very strong. And so in a way, using that metaphor, I think that this fact that we have this commonality around the world, meaning there's something really strong and deterministic about TEK. Okay. Let's see, I'm trying to look at the time now. So let me get to the why TEK is important. And so another thing that I read in Dan Schilling's book chapter in 2018 is that he has some of the myths that are listed here. So for example, that the TK is traditional, it's old, so it's not really relevant in modern times. That's one of the criticisms, maybe the criticism you might have for TEK. And he says that particularly in relation to this issue of sustainability, you know, here we have School of Sustainability. We think on this campus that sustainability is something very important for everyone to focus on and to solve. But so if sustainability is something that we want to achieve, it's not really technological, despite the fact that technology is also important. It's more fundamentally, it's a moral undertaking. And so TEK provides that. And so it never becomes irrelevant, regardless of what technologies, new technology we get. And so that's the answer to this myth that Dan Schilling has. And the native people ruin landscapes too. So that may be another criticism, that there are some environmental destruction that a lot of indigenous groups did over time. But there's this fact that for example, in the US, in North America, or Turtle Island, that's what indigenous people say, what they call the North America. It is true that the people have lived for 13,000 years. And there's something true, there's some truth to it, that there is that's sustainability. And then indigenous group lack machines to destroy habitat. So their technology not advanced enough to destroy habitat anyway. So it's really, TK is not really useful thing to go back to. So that's maybe the criticism. And this historian Hughes, he says that according to the studies that he has done, it's clearly they could have destroyed habitat much more than they have actually done. So there's something that the indigenous groups were doing that was helpful in for sustainability. So what I wanted to do is I have some videos that I wanted to show you because I'm not really expert here. So I'd rather have you listen to some of the experts. And so here, David Suzuki is not indigenous. He's a Japanese Canadian. He's trained as a geneticist, but he's famous. I don't know anybody here is from Canada, but I think I heard that almost everyone in Canada knows about him because he's he has this popular TV programs. So he became more of an environmentalist, and then he has worked a lot with indigenous group in Canada. And so I wanted to show you this 5-minute video, him also talking about why indigenous TK is important in relation to this tribal park that they have in Canada.
You know, I think one of the remarkable things that has come to light over the last couple of decades is that areas that we thought were absolutely pristine wilderness, like the Amazon rainforest, for example, but many other areas like British Columbia's forest, we thought that they were pristine and because humans had no impact on them. But what we're realizing now is that these areas seem pristine to the explorers or the colonizers. But in fact, people had lived in them for thousands of years, and that in fact they had been shaped in large part by humans. The Brundtland Commission report, Our Common Future, 1987, said it very clearly. The only people with a proven track record of living in balance with their area, not for decades or even centuries, but for millennia, are the indigenous people. And when you think about it, they've lived in place by learning. They've learned from the failures, the successes, the mistakes of their ancestors, and those lessons have been passed down through hundreds of generations, distilled down into a body of information, not that you can publish a paper and get a promotion for, critical knowledge for survival. And so it's kind of a no-brainer to say, hey, look, these people have lived in these forests, these areas, all this time. Who better to guide us on a sustainable way of living than the people who've shown by their way they live that it's possible? This is indigenous people's land. They've been living here all this time. We can't just go in and tell them what to do with it. Better to say, hey, how can we help you gain control over your land? Because you will do a better job than we have. Tribal parks are a no-brainer, it seems to me. What a great possibility for Canadians that people who've lived in these lands can control them, can continue to use them, but continue to show us how, well, the kind of practices we can have to, in fact, save the forest for future generations. I think the important thing about tribal parks is the mindset that goes with their being set aside. I've been so amazed at attending First Nations Indigenous events where the prayers and the dances and the songs are all about thanking the Creator for nature's abundance and generosity over and over. But you know, we in the dominant society, we just go and, oh, here's a resource, let's take it. There's no sense of, wow, I'm so grateful to get this. And in acknowledging our gratitude, there is a reciprocity of obligation, of responsibility. And that's the thing about tribal parks. They're not going to go in there and say, oh, how can we exploit this or that? but it's constantly, oh, here we have, thank you for having this forest, thank you for the trees and the animals, thank you. And we've got a responsibility then in accepting your generosity. We have a responsibility to be sure that your children, your seeds will continue to go on. That's the heart of sustainability. And that's what's brought to us by an Indigenous perspective. Embodied in the culture, especially the language, is thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. And when we lose a language and culture, science will never duplicate what's in that hard-won body of information. So I think that we should be pouring as much effort into preserving the cultures and the bits and pieces that have existed after smallpox and colonization and all of these other catastrophes. These wisps of knowledge that remain are precious beyond imagination.
Okay. Yeah, so that's what David Suzuki says. And I think you can see that I'm kind of just saying the same things that he said there. And I will just continue, and then we can take a break, maybe in 5-10 minutes or so, and then we can go on. But I wanted to finish before the break to say what the problem again with the SEK, this dualism that I talked about. It's another thing that I maybe haven't mentioned it yet. I think it's tied to this idea of capitalism, that the nature as commodity resources, we say natural resources, and it's fine to say that ecosystem services. It's as if they are there, the nature is there for people to serve people. And that's a wrong way of, if you want sustainability, if you don't want humans to go extinct, you need a different perspective. And in green growth, where this idea that the technology will save us, technology will be helpful and it's indispensable, essential, but it's not enough. If you think that the growth, the continuous growth, the economic growth underpinned by capitalism can go on forever, that's not really true. It's not sustainable. So the solution to me, and this is also just something that I learned from many scholars, other experts, I think that it's the TK. We think of TK as a moral guide. It's something that can provide the guide, the fundamental guide of how we should behave. And then SEK as one of the powerful tools. The science is powerful. We don't want to give that up. It's really useful, but it's a tool. And it gets to this idea of another keyword that I like you to kind of remember, this two-eyed seeing. So two-eyed seeing is something that one of the Indigenous leaders in Canada proposed by Albert Marshall, is an elder in Canada. And he says that it's a learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of Western knowledges. And so you think about these two things as complementary and use both. And so often, so this is a figure that I got from one of the papers that they have. And so the status quo, they say, is that we have Western science, and I definitely thought that the Western science is the way to go. The science, that's what we want. And in Western science, and that's what we use to understand and approach nature. But you can also have Indigenous knowledge. So IK is Indigenous knowledge in this paper. But it's not really right to think of knowledge assimilation. So if we are not careful, what we might do, which is not really the best way, is to say, oh, yes, we have Western science, it's powerful, so, and it's a great way. The modern times proves that it's the way to go. We want to keep doing this engineering and science. And because Indigenous knowledge is also useful, let's incorporate that and integrate Indigenous knowledge and then be part of this one body of work, knowledge. That's assimilation. That's not going to be the best way, according to the authors here in this paper. The way to go is to do knowledge coexistence. You have one way of thinking about knowledge, nature, that's Indigenous knowledge, another way, Western science, and you use you almost like a being bilingual or multilingual. If you speak, so I speak Japanese and English, but not very well, as you can tell. But if you're an English speaker and Japanese speaker, and if you are fluent, I'm not one of those. If you're fluent, I think some of you are. I think you speak in English as if you are almost a different person. And if you speak Spanish or if you speak Arabic, then you still the same person, but language comes with different culture. So you have two different ways of looking at the same thing. And that's what these authors advocate, that we need to have these two independent but a complementary way of approaching nature. And so what I wanted to do is to have just one more video, a 4-minute video that I wanted to show you. And it's related to Three Sisters Garden. Three Sisters Garden, if you're from Mexico and or other places, there's in one of the indigenous way of farming is called Three Sisters Garden. Instead of having corn, for example, as a monoculture, if you go to Iowa, I have host family in Iowa, so I know how it is in Iowa and in the Midwest. There's a monoculture of soybean or monoculture of corn. Instead of doing that, one way to do it is to grow bean and corn, maize, and squash together. The idea that the corn provides a good structure that the bean can use to grow, and in bean, because they have nitrogen fixing bacteria, they are enhancing the availability of nitrogen in the soil, and that will also help not just bean but corn as well to grow. And then the squash, if you also plant squash, squash would be benefited from the maize and bean as well because of the nutrients and the structure, the physical structure provided to the squash. But squash, because they have leaves that can shade the soil, it will provide good climate for all of these plants together. So they grow together in a better way and more productive compared to if they are grown separately, just corn, squash, and beans. So this Three Sisters Garden is one of the kind of like iconic indigenous wisdom that we have. And I said this because the next video that I wanted to show you, Robin Kimmerer is going to use that as a metaphor to think about this two-eye seeing. It's kind of nice. So I'll do that and then we can take a break after that.
Looking back, it's been, I couldn't believe it because it feels like it was just yesterday that it was being birthed into the world. Maybe it feels like that for you. It's been 10 years since Braiding Sweetgrass was published. And it has, I can say this as an Indigenous scholar, fundamentally transformed the way in which Indigenous studies is thought about, treated, valued, and how we start to see Indigenous thought and knowledge systems valued for environmental policy making. But that was one snapshot in time of your life when you were putting it together and writing it. And some have come to a determination of interpretation that braiding knowledges means fitting Indigenous knowledge into already existing systems. Is that what you intended? And even now, having maybe seen the concept evolve, where do you hope the idea of braiding knowledges goes in the future?
I'm grateful to you for illuminating that question, because in my work and all of our work at the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment and the broader Indigenous science community, of which you and I are both a part, the model that we really try to use is of knowledge sovereignty, that Indigenous knowledge is intrinsically a sovereign way of knowing, as is Western science. They're very different. They have very different assumptions about what knowledge means, where knowledge comes from. And so to me, when I think about the metaphor of the braid in braiding sweetgrass is how do we take these strands of knowledge to care for the earth? But they are separate strands of knowledge. When they are braided together, the notion is of sovereign knowledges in conversation with each other. The metaphor that I actually like to use the most, and have written on a fair bit, is this idea of planting a knowledge garden. I see here my friends from Ganondigan, so I'm going to think about a Three Sisters garden, right? And you and I in the university, I feel like I'm trying to plant a knowledge garden. And for too long, Indigenous knowledge, if mentioned at all, was just sort of a sidebar. And what I really like to think about is when we plant a Three Sisters garden, we plant the corn first. We plant the elder knowledge first. And to me, that's traditional knowledge. That's where we should start. And then after that corn is well established and growing up, then we plant the bean. And to me, Western science is an analog to the bean. Very curious, very wandering all over, unconstrained by accountability for knowledge. That's a fundamental tenet of Western science. That knowledge for knowledge's sake, right? It's not connected to responsibility. But in a Three Sisters garden, what happens? That bean is guided by the corn. And so both of them flourish. And so that's how I like to think about it, is prioritizing the elder knowledge and providing an intellectual scaffolding of sorts for the tools of Western science to be used in a way that embody the values of respect, relationship, reciprocity, reverence. So the corn doesn't become the bean. The beans don't become the corn, but they're more productive when they grow together. And then, of course, that leaves the squash, right? The squash in the garden, right? What is that squash doing? It's creating a microclimate where those two species of plant or of knowledge could grow together. And since you and I are both in universities, as I imagine many of you are as well, I think that's what education is for. Can we create education and research structures that create a microclimate where Indigenous knowledge can lead and Western science being guided by those? So I am not talking about blending knowledges in any way, but having them grow together in complementarity the way that corn and beans do.
Well, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for your attention so far. I think we can take a 5-minute break and come back. So we have about 20 more minutes or so. So I wanted to use the rest of the time to talk about the local TK here. And so in California, of course, we have indigenous culture that's been flourishing for a very long time. It's unclear exactly how long, but it's it could be more than 10,000 years. And so this book called Tending the Wild by Kat Anderson. It's a great book. That's another book together with Braiding Sweetgrass. I'd like to recommend to you. This is available at the library. So in this book, the author, Kat Anderson, goes over different use of plants and different use of animals and how the indigenous groups lived and still live today. So it's they have, in case you don't know, in California, there's just like many, unfortunately, most other places, the indigenous people have been treated so terribly. And so we still have that legacy. And also, you see in another video that I'm going to show you, the local tribe, Muwekma Ohlone tribe, who is in the San Francisco Bay Area, they're also still treated really badly because of the lack of the loss of federal recognition. You'll see that in later. But despite that, the culture and language haven't gone extinct. And you can see in this really thick book the details of how the California TK, what it's about. But rather than me talking about it, non-expert, I thought so I have a few more videos that I wanted to show you. So there is a tribe called Amah Mutsun Tribal Band. And so they are in around Santa Cruz, around Monterey, and in the Monterey Bay. And that's where they have lived for a long time. And they still have a tribe as a good social entity. And the current chairman of this tribe, Val Lopez, he has some explanation of some of the TK here. And so this is it's a long video, but I wanted to show you about six minutes where he talks about in this event that they had at UC Santa Cruz, where he talks a little bit about what happened in or what the TK in California around here.
Well, let's get into some of those land practices because I think they're really important to understand the specifics. And Chairman Lopez and Brooke, I wonder if you would talk about what you know in this area and your tribes in Northern California. What were those practices like here for the thousands of years that people have lived here?
You know, when the early explorers passed through California on the ship, they looked at the land and they recorded in their journals that there was a beautiful mosaic of different colors of different plants and trees. And they were just in patches, you know. And they said that it was a park-like setting. And they thought that right there was just random, just coincidental, just the way it happened to be. They did not recognize that indigenous people had been stewarding and caring for this land for thousands of years. And you know, and that's a big part of the story. It's also recognized as one of the most biodiverse locations and landscapes in North America. In North America, and again, they thought that it was just happened to be the way it was, and but it wasn't just the way it was. It was as a result of our people intentionally stewarding the lands over that period of time, thousands and thousands of years. Our people, for example, you know, they first recognize that the land is sacred. And so they have ceremonies, and they have prayers, and they have ways of collecting materials. It's a reciprocal relationship that we have with the plants. They recognize that the plants and the wildlife and the fish and the water and air are our relatives. And where that comes from is that the Father is Father Sky, Creator. You know, and that's and our mother is Mother Earth. That's what feeds us. That's what provides for us. That's what takes care of us. So looking at it that way, you know, all that we see, the birds, the wildlife, the trees, the plants, the fish, they're all relatives because we have the same mother and we have the same father. And you know, and so the way that we take care of our relatives, you know, our children, our newborns, our grandparents, with the love and the care and the patience, etc. That's where we need to take care of all of our relatives. And that's the approach our people had to caring for the environment here. We also learned a lot of other things, like say, for example, the use of fire. Fire was seen as a gift from Creator. Fire provided warmth when it was cold. It provided a way for us to cook our food. It gave us light when it was dark. Fire is sacred, and we use it for ceremony, and we use it for prayer. But the fire is also an important tool for managing landscapes. So we would burn the landscapes, and that would keep it open. And then they would burn frequently. They would burn every 7, 8, 10 years. You know, at those intervals. And when you burn at those intervals, you do not get those high fuel load buildups and stuff like that. So when you burn, you get a really low intensity burn that doesn't burn hot, that won't start the trees on fire. Maybe Doug fir, you know, some Doug fir, but mostly does not start the trees on fire. And it just creeps along. It's not a raging fire. It just kind of creeps along the ground, and it's easy to manage. And so our people did fire. And so when you do fire, you know, like our seed plants, you know, the shells on the seeds are hard, and they need some kind of disturbance many times before they will germinate. So when you run that fire through, it would soften the seed. And so after a fire, you get a really high seed production. And so that, you know, and that's the way to take care of the birds, other seed-eating animals. And that's the way we took care of the plants, because at times, our diet would be 40% seed. So we're taking care of our food resources for us and for others. You know, and then the second year growth, you start getting these shoots coming up, and those are the preferred foods for the grazing animals. You know, in the third year, you get bunchier plants, and they all had a purpose. And there was a real balance in that. And then, you know, and then whenever you do the burn, the whole cycle starts over again. That's the way our ancestors stewarded the lands. Also, whenever they would collect and gather, you know, the seeds, they would just take a small amount. I've heard them say that they would get a plant, give it a little shake, take those seeds, but leave the rest of the seeds there. They would leave the seeds there for future production of seed plants, and also leave it for the animals and others to use. You know, and whenever we collected shellfish, we collected all the shell. You know, when you look at here are shell mounds here in California. When you look at those shells, they're all basically the same size. You don't have little ones, you don't have big ones. They're all the same size. So our people, when they were harvesting, they were all harvesting the same size. They leave the bigger ones to ensure the species survives, you know, for the breeding part of it, and the younger ones that they let them raise to maturity before they would take them. So, you know, our people had those kind of stewardship to ensure sustainability and stuff like that. When I hear regenerative, all I hear is let's restore indigenous traditions.
So you can see that. So you can see that he talks about some specific things in California, but how he frames those things, that the practices, strikingly similar to what other people, the David Suzuki and Robin Kimmerer, and then what I've been telling you, there seems to be this common theme about reciprocal relationship and thinking of organisms as relatives and living with them. Another thing I wanted to do is to show you this another video, short one, where the chairwoman of Muwekma Ohlone tribe. So that's once again, that's the local tribe we have. I think it's very important to recognize and respect the tribe that wherever the area that you live in currently. And so in case you haven't been introduced to Charlene Nijmeh, the chairwoman, I thought that we should just listen to her a little bit. She doesn't talk so much directly about ecology in this video, but you see what their main efforts and the interest might be.
Charlene Nijmeh. Hello, that is good day in our Chochenyo language. My name is Charlene Nijmeh, and I am the chairwoman for the Muwekma Ohlone tribe of the San Francisco Bay Area. Growing up in our household, being Native American was, you know, we were very proud, you know, to be Ohlone from the Bay Area. And it was important, right? Because there was a lot of things happening in the Bay Area that that the tribe had to deal with. So it was always a part of my life in every aspect. So one of the issues that arose in our household, in our Native American household, had to do with our ancestors, you know, and the desecration of our ancestors. So I had full, I would say, knowledge, firsthand experience of what that meant as a child. I remember one experience when I was 8 years old, and there was a site going on in San Jose. And our tribe, our elders at that time, and my grandmother, who was still alive, you know, showed up on that site, the old Holiday Inn site, and along with my mother, who was the chairwoman of the tribe, you know, they were there to protect our ancestors. And a white archaeologist approached them and said they did not belong there because the Ohlone people were extinct. And what happened there was tragic. You know, it got physical. You know, the archaeologist was trying to remove my grandmother from the site. And, you know, my mother reacted and hit the archaeologist with a shovel. And that really started, at that time for me, to show how important it was, you know, to protect our ancestors. Even though I didn't quite fully understand that issue, but I knew how important it was for us, you know, to make sure that we protected our ancestors and that we were responsible, for them and to re-enter them safely back into the ground. And that also was a pivoting point for our recognition status, because for this archaeologist to say that we were extinct and that we weren't a tribe was so far from the truth. The situation for the tribe that has changed in my lifetime has been, really going back to the issue of our ancestors. The elders at the time that were still alive and my mother really started that movement to bring visibility to the development throughout the Bay Area and how our ancestors were being desecrated. That visibility wasn't there. And actually the respect to the tribe to stop the desecration, of our ancestors was a serious situation for us. But today, looking back and seeing everything that has happened, I think that it's actually turned to the better, because of the visibility of the tribe, the respect now coming to our ancestors. Now there's policies being made that you have to comply, right? As a landowner, a developer, that you can't build something without making sure that you're not going to disturb a sacred site. Because throughout the Bay Area, we live, the Ohlone people live throughout the Bay Area, and our people are buried here. So, we know the evidence shows that if there's going to be any development, you're going to find burials. The message that I would send to the young Muwekma generation is, one thing is, don't give up. Don't give up on your story. Don't give up on your sovereignty. Don't give up on the community. Keep fighting for who you are and share your story in the community. I believe it is very important for the Muwekma to gain recognition. It's because it comes down to sovereignty. It comes down to us being able to once again govern ourselves like our ancestors did, like our community that was recognized and was supposed to have a land base in the early 1900s. We were governing ourselves as a distinct social community. So yes, it's very important to regain our status, because that also means having a home base, having a place where we can gather, live off our land, and stay in the Bay Area. Just most recently, the UC system just passed policies granting free tuition for all recognized tribes members to be able to go to school for free. We don't have access to that because we are not federally recognized. Healthcare is very important for our people. We can't afford healthcare. Most of us don't have healthcare because it's too expensive. But, another thing that happened during the pandemic is the government gave federally recognized tribes funds for the health care, funds to take care of their people during the pandemic who were losing their homes or losing their jobs or having a tough time during the pandemic. And we didn't have access to that CARES Act because we did not have federal recognition. So all of those things are very important to us: housing, a land base, education, and health.
Okay. So this interview goes on. If you like to hear more in the interest of time, I'll just stop here. But you can watch it on YouTube, and then there are other tribal members talking about their life and their relationship to their ancestral land right here. I wanted to use the few minutes that we have left to talk a little bit about what we are doing at Stanford in partnership with their tribe, Muwekma Ohlone tribe. It's a small start that we have. There's actually a long history of relationship. Stanford is actually one of maybe the first university that returned the ancestral remains, the anthropology department, and had this collection, which is a horrible thing to think about, but of these human remains. But it was returned because of the anthropologists and archaeologists who were here And so that happened 35 or around 30 years ago. So, but we're trying to keep that tradition. For example, at Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve, now we have this another name to the preserve, Muwekma. That was a name given to the tribe. It means red mountains in Chochenyo language, but we try to use it to remember that it's their land, ancestral land. But one of the things that happened recently at this biological preserve, this is part of the university campus. If you haven't been there, it's just 15 or 20 minutes drive. So, and I'm the director there at the moment. And so you're welcome to come anytime to this preserve where the teaching is done and research is done. But here, as part of the wildfire management plan that university had, we needed to do something because the wildfires is now everyone in California is really concerned about wildfire because it happens every day, every year. And it's really devastating as part of the climate change, but not just about climate change. But because of that, university had responsibility to do something. And then when they look at the Jasper Ridge, oh, there's a lot of vegetation there, and so we need to do something. And so they decided that they along the boundary of the preserve, and then with the rich neighborhood, we needed to cut some of the vegetation. But we used the preserve used that opportunity to use fire and bring back fire. And so here you see this pile burn happening. About 200 piles were made in the chaparral vegetation area. And we did the fire. I used fire. This happened earlier this year in March. But then we were really fortunate to have the chairwoman, Nijmeh, that you saw in the video, come and talk to us the importance of bringing back sacred fire to their homeland, and then with other tribal members. And so it was really a significant thing that we did with the fire crew, listening to them, and then went to this fire, and these are some of the other tribal members looking at the fire, giving a prayer together with Dr. Michael Wilcox, who is from the Native American Studies program here. It's a Stanford teacher here. And then also some students came to directly talk to the tribal members. And what I wanted to end with here is this plant. So I went there last week and we realized that there's this green plant, these ones growing up just around one of many of the piles that were burned back in March. And we looked up and then we found out that these are one of the rare plants that are locally endemic, meaning that this is a species of plant or variety of plant that's found only in the Bay Area, nowhere else in the world. But they are growing despite the fact that we didn't see these plants before the fire happened. And it turned out that these are some of these fire-adapted, fire-dependent plants where their seeds can be viable in the soil for a long time, like more than 100 years. And they were just patiently waiting until we bring back this indigenous fire to preserve this Ohlone land. And they responded to this our fire use, and then they're coming back. And I think of this as a symbol of indigenous awakening. And so if you bring back indigenous culture, they respond. And in the same way, the tribe that's really trying hard to get federal recognition, they're on their trip to go to DC to demand federal recognition. I think their effort will lead to this indigenous awakening. The plant is telling us that that's inevitable. We'll see the awakening of the native culture in this land. And it's not just for the tribe, it's for everyone, including all of us here. Because for sustainability, what we need is their guidance. Then we need Muwekma's guidance as an indigenous group here, because the wisdom they have from the ancestors for thousands of years, that's really what we need for sustainability. So that's what I wanted to end my lecture with. Thank you very much.